Hi, everyone.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh,
Good. How are you?
I am okay. Yeah, we've been getting our tentative work schedules for fall meeting, and some of those days are going to be really rough.
I'm sure that was a delight.
Well, yeah, it's just like, you know, like for some days it's going to be 7 a.m. to like 1:30 a.m.
Wow.
That is rough.
And there's also, I don't know, it's just a matter of coverage, and we're supposed to be mainly focusing on section events, but they also need us to do like a bunch of other things to like support other departments. And you will see how that works out.
Yeah.
All right. So you guys should be co-hosts now.
Yeah, I believe I am.
Yeah, I am too.
Yeah, I see that. We will.
We'll have a few minutes of introduction here, so as people filter in, they shouldn't be missing too much of the conversation. We are very fortunate today to have Dr. Tracy Holloway with us, sharing her experiences and offering some advice for us all. I'm Ryan Harp, a postdoctoral research fellow at Northwestern. I'm also a part of the Geohealth Early Career Researchers Subcommittee, who is putting on this event, and I will be moderating today. So welcome, and thank you all for joining us. It's great to see that we have quite a few people turning out, and we hope that you get a lot out of today's presentation. So we'll begin with a talk by Dr. Holloway before moving on to a moderated Q&A after about 20 or 25 minutes or so. And that Q&A will start with questions that people submitted on registration, but if you have questions that come up at any point during the talk today, feel free to send those in the chat to the Zoom user labeled Ask Questions Here, who is secretly one of us in disguise, but we will be organizing those in the background and direct those on to Dr. Holloway as they come up. Also, audio and video have been turned off by default, and we would appreciate it if you left your audio and video off just to keep the amount of bandwidth that we are all using to a minimum and allow everyone to stream this as best they can. A couple of quick announcements. If you liked today's talk and want to hear more about navigating careers and things of that nature, we will be hosting a fall meeting event called Navigating a Career in Geohealth, which will be on December 11th at 6 o'clock Eastern. And we'll have a panel of about 4 or 5 people from inside and outside of academia talking about their career path and also talking more about how to navigate interdisciplinary careers and things of that nature. So if you are interested, we have a sign-up form here, which we will add to the chat. And one thing I should note on that is that that event is only open to people who have registered for the AGU fall meeting. So unfortunately, the attendance is kind of cut off there. But for those of you who are attending AGU, it should be a great chance to interact with all of us. But the early career webinar, like you're attending today, is open to all. And so just to put another plug in, if you are interested in attending future events from the early career webinar, we will be featuring research talks by early career scientists, as well as more professional development focused discussions like today. We'll be taking a couple months off, but resuming in early February. And from that point on, we should be having a webinar every month on the second Friday of that month at this same time, which is again 2 o'clock Eastern and 11 o'clock Pacific. If you indicated that you are interested in future events when you registered for this event, you should already be set to go. But if not, feel free to sign up here, which will again be added to the chat also. And yeah, please share with your friends and colleagues. And with that, give a quick introduction here before handing it off to our presenter for today. So our inaugural speaker today is Dr. Tracy Holloway, who is the Gaylord Nelson Distinguished Professor in the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies and the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Holloway has offered to discuss her career path as part of today's seminar, so I'll allow her to talk about all of her various career stops. But I will say that Dr. Holloway is currently a leading air quality scientist, heading up a research group focused on increasing our understanding of connections between air quality, energy, and climate. In this capacity, Dr. Holloway has mentored dozens of students at all levels, and of course, has authored numerous research publications and book chapters. In addition, she also serves as the team leader for the NASA Health and Air Quality Applied Science Team, which is a group dedicated to benefiting the public interest through collaborative activities that bring NASA data and tools into the public health arena. Beyond her efforts as a researcher, Dr. Holloway is also committed to the education and mentoring of students and early career scientists. She co-founded and later served as president of the Earth Science Women's Network, or ESWN, and has won many awards for her mentorship and leadership efforts, including being a recipient of one of this year's AGU Ascent Awards, which recognizes excellence in research and leadership. So we are very fortunate today to have Dr. Holloway with us to share her story and wisdom and to kick off our early career webinar series. So with that, I will hand this off to Dr. Holloway. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ryan, and thanks to everyone who's taking the time to join us here today. I'm really thrilled to be here. There's really nothing I think is more important than supporting the career development of people at all career stages, whether they're undergraduates trying to figure out what to do next, or senior scientists and researchers thinking about career transitions. So I really appreciate your engagement, and I hope you'll ask lots of questions. I put together an overview slideshow, really just to kick us off. And I'm gonna share it. I realized I'm actually on the wrong, I wanna start on the first screen and make it full screen. And so I'll tell you a little bit about myself, but also kind of pitch out some of my kind of big picture themes that I think are really important. And I'm happy to talk about any of those as we move through the question and answer period. So as Ryan mentioned, I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I've been a professor here for almost 20 years. I started in 2003. I actually applied in 2000. And I think as a testament to sometimes the challenge of navigating an interdisciplinary career is figuring out, what jobs you're qualified for, how to apply, and then for them to figure out, do you fit what they thought they were looking for? And in my case, there was a lot of discussion internally as to whether I fit the job that I applied for, which was a job in energy analysis and policy. And I don't blame them for wondering that, because my background is atmospheric science. And I didn't have anything on my resume that said energy, except the fact that energy makes air pollution, and I studied the chemistry of pollutants in the atmosphere. So I'll talk about that a little bit on my next slide, about that connection. But I was hired here through an initiative on energy. And from there, my 10-year home was the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. I have also been very active in the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences, and I now have a split appointment with that department. I also, over the years, have picked up appointments in civil engineering, mechanical engineering, and geological engineering, because as you know, interdisciplinary work cuts across a lot of different departments. Before I came to Wisconsin, I did my undergraduate at Brown University, where I majored in applied math. And then I did my PhD at Princeton in the Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences program based at the NOAA Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory. But actually, before I started college, I had no idea I wanted to be a scientist at all. I thought that I would major in history. I thought I might go on to be the mayor of Chicago. So I'm a big fan of being open-minded and seeing what new interests arise. And so coming from a background where I thought I'd do policy or law, getting into science, when I was in the middle of graduate school, I started to think like, gosh, is science really for me? Or maybe I should have gone to law school or gone into politics. And I think it was an effort to merge these different interests that led me to interdisciplinary research, where I was using the tools and methods of atmospheric science, especially computer models, but to answer questions related to public health, energy planning, policy, and more. So, I think I'm really in this interdisciplinary space that I know many of you are in if you're in the Geohealth community. And I think some of the comments I am making may be relevant, especially to interdisciplinary folks, but hopefully wherever you are, you'll find something helpful. Ryan mentioned that I lead the NASA Health and Air Quality Applied Sciences team, that we pronounce that weird acronym HACAST. And if you Google hacast.org, HAQAST, you can find out more about that team. That's a perfect example, I think, though, of how this interdisciplinary work is finding more and more audiences. I think it's a kind of project which I'm really excited about, because I don't have to put on a hat as an atmospheric scientist or somebody interested in health or someone interested in policy. It's one of these things, it's NASA funded, but specifically to reach new communities. So it's been exciting to be involved in that as one example of big picture interdisciplinary applied research. I've been on the board of the journal Environmental Research Letters since it started, which has now been over 10 years ago. I also, as Brian mentioned, co-founded the Earth Science Women's Network and the Earth Science Jobs Network. And if you're not a subscriber to ES_jobs_net, which is still managed by ESWN and hosted by the National Center for Atmospheric Research, I recommend you just Google it up right now and join. It's free to subscribe, and there are between 10 and 20 jobs per day posted there. Over the years, I've done a lot around building capacity in careers, training on a lot of the skills that you're not taught in undergrad or grad school, but that are essential for career development. I was really thrilled last year to be on the AGU Geohealth Careers panel. And I've also helped organize many of these kind of career panels through the Earth Science Women's Network at my home institution, UW-Madison, and other organizations. So this is the slide that, is kind of my big picture, what I recommend students think about, early career people think about as you are beginning to navigate your career process. And I'll talk about each of these bullet points and hopefully use those to tee up future conversations. I think that to me, the key parts of this process is, first of all, getting to know yourself and how you fit into the landscape of opportunities, whether those are jobs, academic disciplines, research areas. It's a partnership that you need to know what makes you happy, and then you need to know what opportunities are out there, and that's the key to figuring out how they fit together. As you're learning about the process, the opportunities, the field, and even yourself, I think a great way to do that is by networking. And in my opinion, networking is the number one, hands down, no questions asked, most important skill for building your career. And most people I talk to at any stage have never been trained on how to network. And so I'll give some examples of that in the next couple slides, but also that's something we can circle back to during the Q&A. The easiest way to network is to ask for advice. Contacting somebody and to say, I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk for 15 minutes and tell me about your career, or how did you get involved working for that company, or what advice do you have for somebody who's just graduating graduate school? Everybody loves to give advice. When you ask somebody for advice, they feel very flattered. They feel like you care about their opinion. Imagine how you would feel if one of your younger siblings contacted you and said, I need your help to figure out my career. Or if a younger person from your alma mater where you went to high school contacted you and said, you're my role model. What would you suggest I do for my next step? It's a very flattering process, and it opens people up to building a connection, and then not inauthentically either, because you really are getting their advice. You really are building that relationship, and you really do care about them. So I think it's an authentic and kind of win-win on many levels way to build your network and build the number of people who know about you and your own access to other opportunities. The third thing would be to make yourself easy to find, and having an up-to-date CV posted on the web is really important. But think about your LinkedIn, your Google Scholar, taking a few hours every couple of months just to update those. It can really be a big investment in your career, whether or not you're on the job hunt or not. And we'll come back to that in a few slides. And then finally, to begin to explore what options are out there. And this is independent of where you are in your career. I remember when I was undergraduate doing research at the Johnson Space Flight Center, my mentor recommended, when I told him I was thinking about going to graduate school, the first thing he said was that you should join the AGU and read the EOS newspaper, which back in those days was print copy that came in the mail. But he said, you flip to the end to the jobs section and read the jobs in atmospheric science, because that's what I was thinking about graduate school in. And at first I thought, that is weird advice. Like, I'm an undergrad, and if I go to grad school, I won't be on the job market for 5 or more years. But actually, it was really such good advice, because the best time to be reading job postings is when you're not on the job market, when you can be looking to see what kind of jobs interest you, what are the skills that they're looking for, because you don't want to wait till you're on the job market looking for jobs and to see that all the jobs you want require some specific software, or that you've taken a class in finance. Who knows? Because if you read those early on, then you actually have time to build those skills. So when you do go on the job market, you're ready. Yeah, so we'll come back to those in just a minute. The remainder of my slides are just digging into the same list. So with the get to know yourself, a few points, and these came up at the Geohealth panel at AGU last year. But one is, don't be too tied to the language used by your academic community. You may think of yourself as a Geohealth scholar, but if you decide you want to work outside of academia, or even inside of academia, and limit your search terms to Geohealth, you will find very few jobs, because different organizations, whether they're government labs or nonprofits or industry or universities, use different terminology, especially in this interdisciplinary space. What you call geohealth, they may call public health. They may call environmental science. They may call environmental studies or sustainability, or something completely different. And I think just to be sensitive to the fact that the dream job for you may or may not use the same words that you use today to describe what you do. And that when you apply to those jobs or reach out to people for networking, try to use the same terminology that they use in their websites, on their LinkedIn page, so that it's clear. And I'll just say, right now, a lot of the work that I do is around air quality. And sometimes students reach out to me and they say, I am interested in sustainability. And, sustainability is a great term, but it makes it hard to say, well, am I really the right person for them to talk to? Or would it be better for me to introduce them to a colleague doing recycling? Or when they say sustainability, do they mean public attitudes about conservation? So to the degree that you can reach out and use the same words in a job application that are in the job ad, or when you're introducing yourself to someone, use the same words that they use on their website. It's a way to make sure that you're really making that connection and that terminology isn't a barrier. And, I mentioned that how I was hired here. I grew up in the Midwest, and both of my siblings went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for college, at least at the beginning. And so when I saw a job at UW-Madison in energy, science, and policy, that's what it was called, I thought, oh my gosh, I would love to live in Madison. I'd love to be back in the Midwest. But I did not consider myself an energy person at all. But I liked the idea of looking at energy, and I knew that it was in line with what I did as an atmospheric chemist and an atmospheric modeler. But I wanted to make sure that when that my application was viewed seriously and that it wasn't viewed as not fitting the job. So, my cover letter was very much about how interested I was in energy and how I wanted to build a research program in energy. And I did my best to make myself look on paper the way that the job was describing the ideal candidate. And so, this isn't a matter of misrepresenting yourself. The goal is instead to make sure that, if you think you're a good fit for a job, that you want the hiring committee to also think you're a good fit for the job. So, I think that this is something we can come back to in the Q&A, but just to be aware that the dream job for you may use different terminology in describing their work than you're using today at whatever stage or employer you're working in now. I mentioned this importance of networking. This is, I have a couple more slides on networking in a second, but I'll just say a few words. Is if you want to start thinking about networking, the real way to think about it is a relationship. You want people to know who you are, and so that if they know of a job that's available that you might be a good fit, maybe they think of you. If they see something that a paper that they think you might want to read, they send you the paper. If you need somebody to ask for advice, you know who to ask for advice. Building these relationships is building an infrastructure that can help your career grow in the long term. And don't forget, a lot of science has to do with kind of invisible relationships. For example, if you're being considered for an award, somebody is nominating you for that award. If people don't know you, they're not going to nominate you. Even with the AGU, they have the invited panels and who's getting the oral and who's getting the poster. All of these decisions are being made based on information that people have about you, your work, and your career. So the more that you can build the relationship so more people know about you and what you're doing, the more you're setting yourself up for opportunities. I'd really recommend, if you have never heard of Carrie Ann Rockmore, that you write that name down and Google her, because she has a whole series of essays on many things, including networking in academia, in the online newspaper called Inside Higher Ed, and they're all freely available. One of her frameworks is that she talks a lot about sponsors. And I really like this terminology because as if you're a graduate student or a postdoc, you're certainly aware of the role of your mentor. And a mentor is somebody who can kind of guide you and give advice. But you should also be aware that the people on your committee, your advisor, though they're also involved in conversations about you. People may ask them, who do you recommend for a job? Or I'm looking for a postdoc. Do you have any recommendations? And this idea that a sponsor is someone who's helping to control the conversation about you, even when the door is closed. And there's different ways to be engaging your sponsors effectively, but they're basically like the powerhouses of your networking circle. You have your network, but within your network, there's certain people who are really playing a big role in shaping your career, even if you don't know it. And those are your sponsors. And so Carrie Ann Rockmore really put forward that framework. And it's one that I think is really helpful to be aware of, that there's certain things you're not controlling, like you can't control what your sponsors say about you, but you can certainly make sure that you know who might be one of your sponsors and letting them know when you just published a paper, or letting them know what kind of jobs you're hoping to get, so that if you keep your sponsors in the loop, it increases the odds that they're going to be able to advocate for you effectively. Informational interviews is just sort of a generic term for getting information in this networking framework. And again, if you want to Google something, there's a lot of good articles about informational interviews. And, I said from my stories, you never know how a relationship might help you. I'm going to share two little graphics because I love graphics. Is just one about my own research program growing. And to say that, I started with some friends and colleagues at Earth Science Women's Network back in 2002. And through the Earth Science Women's Network, I met different women in the earth sciences, two of whom invited me to give a talk at NCAR. So I started in ESWN, in part just to build connections. One of these then invited me to give a talk. Okay, well, that's nice. It goes on my resume. But then when I went to NCAR, as you do if you ever go to give a talk somewhere, or if people come to your institution giving a talk, the speaker is set up with lots and lots of meetings. And usually you don't know where these meetings are going to go. You don't know what the agenda is. They just say, hey, who wants to meet with Dr. Jones, who's coming to campus? And in my case, I met with two scientists from NCAR. And we, were discussing research, their interest, my interest, but through this informal conversation, we decided to apply for a grant at NASA. And in fact, we applied. I was the PI, and we got it. That was by far the first big grant that I got while I was here at Wisconsin. And that led to money, which is nice. It also led to papers, which is nice. And then when I went up for tenure in 2008, 2009, the fact that I got the big grant and the papers that it yielded were fundamental to me getting tenure. And in fact, now I lead this NASA program, which again, probably wouldn't have occurred if I hadn't had a track record of collaboration and work with NASA data and funding. So here is a situation where, one relationship building activity led to another, led to a conversation, led to another, but that ends up yielding very, very direct benefits to my career. And just by way of another example is a situation where I was looking to hire someone. And I was looking to hire someone to work with me on air quality here at Wisconsin. This was a number of years ago. And so I posted a job announcement on the jobs list, and I sent it to different professional networks. But I also sent emails to people I knew in my network to say, hey, do you know anybody who might be interested in this? And I got a response back from a colleague of mine named Joe. And Joe had actually forwarded me the resume of a student that he'd never met named Erica. But Erica was a student, she was graduating undergrad, in fact, and she had sent her resume to her network. And in her network was a guy named Mike. And then Mike got her email and her resume, and he sent it to his network, say, hey, if any of you know, there's a student, Erica, she's looking for a position. And then that was sent to Joe. So then when I wrote to Joe saying, hey, do you know somebody who might have know this? And Joe happened to have Erica's resume, and lo and behold, then I was able to hire Erica, and she was fantastic, and we had a great working relationship. But I think it shows you that this is not a linear process, that there's people out there looking for you, and there's ways that you can make yourself on their radar. And oftentimes it's through decisions of people like Mike and Joe and whoever that you may not actually know or not know very well. Which then brings us to point 3, making yourself easy to find. This idea that your network will be working even if you don't know it. And it's very, very common for professionals in any field to ask each other, hey, we're hiring around somebody for communication, or I'm looking for a postdoc, or, I'm thinking about a new graduate student. Do you know anyone who'd be good for this? And this kind of conversation is happening all the time. And what you want to do is to make it as easy as possible for your sponsors and for other people in your network to quickly be like, oh yeah, Francisco would be perfect for this position, or Rob would be great for that job. And, when that crosses my mind, oh, this would be a good fit for so-and-so, then the first thing I do is Google the person, because I'm not going to contact Francisca and tell her about this opportunity that may never materialize, or maybe it's not even public. Maybe my colleague was just asking me for some names of people that they should look into. But having your information on the internet in a very clear professional way makes it easy for someone who wants to help you to quickly find your information and pass it along. And it's just one of these things that it's easy to do. You put the information out there, but I think it's also sort of getting into a mindset that things are happening that may affect your career, even if you don't know it. And so just putting the information out there to make yourself easy to find and to highlight your accomplishments is a way of investing in your career just as directly as actually filling out a job application. And the last point I'll make here is just this starting to explore your options early on about thinking about what you want out of life, what you want out of a position. There's a lot of big choices that people make related to their job that affect their career. And, you know, this may be where you live. It may be how much of a salary you want or need, what kind of a lifestyle you want, what topic, how important is it to you to stay close to the areas that you studied in a school. And, you know, privately, you can, of course, be as picky as you want. If you don't want to live in the West Coast, or if you don't want to live in a certain country, don't apply for jobs there. Be as picky as you want. But I would advise that publicly, you'll always be in the benefit of being positive and open-minded. Sometimes I talk to students who say, well, you know, I really don't want to live I'm in the Midwest. So they might say to me, I don't want to work in the Midwest. I really want to go to California or New York. And that's fine. But then if they've told me that and a job comes up in Chicago or Minneapolis or Madison, I'm not going to send it to them because they've told me they don't want a job in the Midwest. And if that's totally true, of course, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But I think oftentimes people say that even if they'd be willing for the right job to live in a different area, or if they'd be willing for the right job to change fields. And so, you know, I think that when you're engaging with your network, talking to your sponsors, be clear about what you're looking for, what you're hoping for, but, you know, try not to put on too many restrictions unless you really, really 100% want to stick with them, because otherwise you may be ruling out opportunities that you want. And at the very least, isn't it nicer to have more opportunities and then be picky after you have them versus having other people say, oh, well, you know, she wouldn't be interested in this position because she told me she's not wanting to live in Chicago. So that's just a sort of a general tip from some resources. I mentioned EOS, of course, and the Earth Science Jobs Net, both great ways to start getting options coming into your inbox with very little work. And, you know, as you're looking at jobs, whether you're looking at jobs years in advance of being on the market, or whether you're looking at jobs when you're actually searching, don't feel like you need to fit 100% of the qualifications that they list in the job application. This is, you know, there's been a lot of research about this, that oftentimes men are more willing to apply for a job where they have fewer of the credentials, and women sometimes hold themselves to a higher percentage. But I've seen this from so many different angles. And one story I'll tell was I'd been a professor at Wisconsin for a few years, and I did some work in the area of how climate change impacted air quality. And I was contacted by a headhunter who said, we're looking for someone with a PhD and 10 years of experience working in the intersection of climate change and air quality. And, you know, I had a PhD, but I didn't have 10 years of experience. And I told them this. I said, well, that wouldn't be me. Do you really need 10 years, or do you mean just a PhD and some experience? And I said, oh, no, yeah, PhD and some experience. That's fine. And then I said, well, you know, I have some graduate students who are really qualified and they're graduating, but don't have experience. Would that be okay? And the headhunter said, oh, yes, you know, that would be okay too. So then I said, well, you know, I work with a lot of students who are master's students, but they've done research through their master's and oftentimes in this area. If there was a really qualified master's student, would they be appropriate to apply for this job? And then, the headhunter's like, yes, I think so, as long as they'd had some research experience. And now, I decided to push it just one more step. And I said, what about if it was a really talented undergraduate who'd been involved in research as part of their undergraduate studies? Should I encourage them to apply for this job? And the headhunter was like, well, it would have to be a very exceptional undergrad, but certainly we would consider them. So here you go. In about a 5-minute conversation, we moved from a PhD and 10 years experience all the way down to somebody who just got their bachelor's would be considered. And I've seen many, many students apply for jobs where it says that they need a PhD, but they have a master's, or it says it needs to be in certain areas, but they bring other skills. So really, don't rule out jobs just because you don't check off every box. Usually these job announcements are written in a way that they're trying to get as many people to apply as possible. And so they may say we want A and B and C, really because they're happy to have A or B or C, but maybe in their dream they would have all of them, but you don't know who else is applying. So the real thing is, start trying to make yourself as strong of a candidate as you can be, but don't limit yourself. The worst that can happen if you apply for a job that you're not qualified for is that they say no. And actually, oftentimes, if you do apply for a job that you're not quite qualified for, but they like your application anyway, they may write back to you and say, oh, this wasn't the right job for you, but we have an opening that you should be considered for. And I've seen those kind of situations play out many times as well. So I'm going to stop here and take questions, but there's certainly a lot to discuss. And the one thing that I didn't put on that list, but I thought afterwards I should have, is negotiation. And I think that's something that I think is also super important, super valuable. If you are applying for jobs, if you do get the go ahead that they want to hire you, and then you start thinking about how to negotiate. This is really an important step. And I think, a lot of people feel like they come across as greedy or mean if they start trying to ask for stuff, but employers are really expecting you to be advocating for yourself. And if I could recommend one podcast, I recommend this to a lot of students, but slate.com has a 10-part podcast called The Negotiation Academy. And it was by two reporters who attended a negotiation graduate seminar at Columbia University and translated it into 10 episodes, each 10 minutes long. And I think it really helps get into the mindset of negotiating as not something that's awkward and not something where you're being greedy, but just a natural way to come to a shared understanding, and hopefully a shared understanding about the dream job for you.
Well, great. Thanks a lot for all of your insights, Tracy. I hope a lot of people got as much out of that as I did. As someone who is both just coming off a job search and also about to be entering a new job search, as postdocs are often doing, I know this is really helpful for me. And yeah, we have a lot of great questions that have come in, so I'll just start asking them and we'll go from there. I think since a lot of this was focused on finding a job and finding the job that's right for you, and I think we'll kind of start off in that direction. And so the first question I want to ask is, where can we go to find Geohealth jobs in industry? Well, what are the keywords we should be using? I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but maybe if you want to expand on that and some of the different venues that people can be looking for these jobs, and then also how to narrow down the range of available career opportunities.
Yeah, so I think this sort of comes back to this point of thinking about the where you fit into the landscape of opportunities. And I think that I can't think of any industry or employer that I can think of that would advertise for a job in Geohealth. Geohealth is just the terminology of Geohealth is a very AGU, One Health. There's communities in the health community that's moving toward planetary issues, and in the geosciences that are moving toward health. But that Geohealth terminology is not something that I think you'll see very much in the private sector or even in nonprofits. So I think that depending on where you are, I think I would look for and I think it also depends on like what kind of an industry are you thinking about getting involved in. For example, there's a lot of jobs in biotech, and and those jobs pertain to public health, vaccines, broader scale issues. And they may be really excited by your ability to bridge health and environment, but the job itself might be called public health analyst or policy analyst. There's also jobs related to environmental consulting, jobs in the government, which is not exactly industry, but working at the Department of Energy, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Health, the National Park Service. And I'd also say that there's a lot of transferable skills that your expertise in earth science and public health bring, whether it's modeling or data analysis or problem solving. And I'd say that the field that I would bet that many academics find as a natural step from research is consulting. And there's a lot of consulting can mean anything. Broadly, consulting is solving problems, which is what research is too. And they're usually they're real world problems, which real world problems do not fit usually into one discipline. So consulting is really a great fit for interdisciplinary researchers. And there are some consulting companies that are in very specific topics, like I do air quality, and there's a lot of air quality consulting companies. But there are also high-level consulting companies that tackle these sort of big transformative topics. And two of the biggest, for example, are McKinsey, and another is called the Boston Consulting Group. And both of these hire a lot of PhDs.
Great. I think that was a really, really helpful answer. I think we'll steer in a slightly different direction than we had a couple questions come in about, which is time management. So both work-life balance as you are going about your research and grad school, early career studies, and then also like how you manage your professional timeline. So thinking in terms of, if you have a conference that's coming up in a few months, how do you think about kind of tying all these things together all the things that you're working on at different time scales together to kind of stay on top of what's a very busy career?
Yeah, those are great topics. And I think a lot about time management. I often say that, the most valuable resource that I have is my time. And we all have 24 hours a day. The busiest person in the world has the same 24 hours as somebody in elementary school. We all have 24 hours. So I think, one thing in terms of tackling this is just to be aware of where your time is going and how the allocation of your time matches the goals that you want to get done. To where you can outsource things to other people, I would strongly recommend trying to get better at outsourcing. And outsourcing can mean different things at different parts of your life. Sometimes it means if you're working on a team project, making sure that like taking the time to make sure that everybody knows what their project is so that you don't get stuck doing it all the night before it's due. Another issue of outsourcing is, if you're having roommates or if you live with a partner or, where your family situation is, is everybody chipping in to get the dishes done or make dinner? And sometimes having a little bit of awkward conversations to say, I feel a little bit like I'm doing more than my fair share. Can we figure out a way to harmonize this? On the one hand, who does the dishes may not seem like a work topic, but it is, because you all have 24 hours in the day. Like that's it. And if you're spending more time on housework, it's really hard to get that to have the same energy. And so of course I do housework, but I think this idea that like trying to just be aware that your hours are going somewhere, and where are your hours going? And if you have the means to then be, if you're a junior professor and you can hire undergraduates to help with some of the aspects of your research lab, that can be a very effective way to outsource. Hiring editors to edit what you're doing, using some of your research funds to go over some of the things that you may not like as well, or that may be more time consuming and less exciting for you, data processing, whatever. And at home, hiring someone who, like, ordering the meal kits from HelloFresh or something like that, or ordering in dinner a couple nights a week as a way to solve that. I feel like, outsourcing and in all levels is a way to try to get as much of your time back to you. Now, once you have your own time back as much as you can, then there's a question of how to prioritize the things on your to-do list. And it's often said that there's sort of an inverse relationship between importance and urgency. Importance and urgency. And I think in research, this comes up all the time, because that really important paper that you want to get done, that may be the most important thing for your long-term career, but it's not sending you emails like the students that you may be teaching, or somebody asking for your advice, or somebody who wants you to come to a meeting. So there's these urgent things, and then there's the important things. And of course, sometimes things are both. But carving out space in your day that is for you to do the things that you find important for your career, important for your success on your job, that putting that on your calendar and protecting it is so vital. And, it took me many, many years to figure this out, because I tend to be somebody, if a student writes to me and asks, like, do you have time to meet this week? I'll look at my calendar and try to figure out, like, maybe I can squeeze them in between lunch and my teaching at a certain time. But I was doing this so much that, that I remember my husband, his name is Paul, and he's very nice, very Zen, meditates every morning, like very calm, a good partner for me. And I would tell him some days, I'd say, well, today I have 10 meetings back to back. So I won't be able to check my email until I get home after dinner. And he would say, who manages your schedule? Because I would like to talk to that person. And of course, it was a joke because I manage my own schedule, but he's right. If I did have an assistant who booked me back to back with no time to go to the bathroom, I would fire that person. Like, that would not be a good person helping me succeed in my job. And so you need to be your own manager. And so, over time, I've gotten much better at, when a student asks to meet with me, I'll say, yes, I can meet 2 or 3 weeks from now in the future. And then that person has high value time of mine. I mean, I'm focused on them. I'm not run ragged from 10 meetings. And I preserve the time in my schedule. And I also preserve time to respond to urgent things, because urgent things that were unscheduled will come up, whether it's with your home and your kids, or your car breaks down, or an emergency comes up with your research, some grant opportunity that you really feel like you need to apply to at a short notice. And if you've been scheduled end to end, it's really hard to have the flexibility and the nimbleness to respond to those. It's also very hard to have the creative energy and the creative problem solving. So, I guess I would say, think about what your career goals are, what is important to you, and allocate the time necessary to achieve those. And, I think back to the networking thing, having people that you can ping for advice on, like, is this important? Is this a good use of my time? That can really be very, very helpful, because sometimes opportunities come up and, is this a good thing for me to do, or is it a waste of time? And having people that you trust, who you can get that kind of candid opinion about, can also be valuable for prioritizing.
For sure. And on that train of thought, we had a couple of questions about, in this time of COVID, when we're all working remotely, how can we go about trying to cultivate potential relationships with, I think you referred to them as sponsors and potential letter writers. How do you reach out to people you might be looking to collaborate with? Do you have any tips for doing that in this very online world?
Yeah, certainly, things have changed in many ways, but, of course, we're on many more Zoom meetings than we normally would, but even when it's the the regular times, or whatever we call the before and after COVID times, even then in science, so much is long distance. Our scientific collaborators are stretched all around the world, and the people that we'd be most likely to write a grant with probably don't work down the hall from where we are. So I think actually, if anything good comes out of it, it might be that we're better at this kind of long distance networking. But I think also that a lot of the basic ideas have been here even before COVID. And namely, I would say that the best way to connect is to talk, two-way dialogue, going back and forth. And this, sometimes this can be kind of intimidating, because if you don't know the person, and like, what are you going to talk about? And, you're going to feel put on the spot, but it is really worth the effort to set up phone meetings or Zoom meetings, and to, slowly get better at feeling like you can talk to people and reach out to people. And, and I think, again, back to my point, that there's no easier way to do that than to ask for advice. So, if there was somebody, for example, that you wanted to connect with, and that, I think sending them an email and saying, would you have time to talk on the phone or a video chat for 15 minutes? Because I want to ask you your advice on fill in the blank. Like, it could be where to publish a paper, or how to find a postdoc, or whatever. And, they may say, gosh, I'd love to talk, but I just don't have time. Or they might say, yes, I'd be happy to. Or they might say, well, why don't you just email me your questions and I'll write back. But if you can try to get that two-way dialogue going, then you're building a rapport. And so, you email to set up the meeting, you have the meeting, and then you email afterwards to thank them for the meeting. Because remember, the goal of this connection isn't just the 15 minutes that they're speaking. It's not just for you to get the information and move on with your life. Ideally, like, you're building a relationship that then you can circle back with. And if you've talked to somebody a couple of times over the phone, even if it's only maybe once every year, then if you see them in person, like at the AGU meeting, then you actually can go up to them in person. Oh, thanks so much. It was the advice you gave me was really helpful in me figuring out what to do after I finished my degree. So, I think just to recognize that there's this combination of online and in-person engagement that is always part of science. And I'll note that, there are more and more platforms for networking within the community. Like, there's the AGU Connect platform, which is bulletin boards. The AAAS has something called Trellis. I don't know if it's still going on, but it's their way of connecting. If any of you are in the Earth Science Women's Network, they have a Facebook group for women in science, self-defined women, self-defined scientists, and sometimes in Twitter, of course, Twitter, Instagram. These are all ways to be part of a community. And once you are part of it, if somebody posts a post that you think is really interesting, or wow, that's very related to your work, then you can reach out with an email personally to them to follow up on that. So, meeting in the Twitterverse does not mean that that's the start and the end of your relationship. You might encounter each other in the Twitterverse and then send them an email. And then if you email, then you might talk on the phone. And if you talk on the phone, then you might meet in person somewhere. So I think to sort of just appreciate that there is these levels that have always been there. It's just, I'd say this year, the online is everything and then the in-person is not. But even in the regular times, the in-person would probably be the minority of the type of engagements you'd have, at least with people outside of your institution.
Certainly. Thank you for that information. And let's see, a couple of questions here are concerning family. So on two different aspects. So one, the so-called two-body problem, or if you have two partners who are both somewhat career focused, and how do you handle that? And then also, if you are looking to start a family, particularly if you're a woman, how do you go about navigating those two challenges?
Yeah, well, I'll talk about both of them. I'll start with the second one and then come back. I mean, I think one thing about family, well, first I'll tell you what is my situation, and then just to put it in context, is when I was on the job market, I was single. And then I'd already taken the job at Wisconsin and had a long distance relationship during my postdoc that didn't work out, and that was okay. And then, so I never had to deal with the two-body problem personally, because even my partner was not an academic. And, but then I came to Wisconsin and I met my husband, and he already lived here and his mother lived here. And so, you know, it was almost like connecting with some family that was already here. And then, you know, I met him when I was 34, I think, somewhere around then. And so maybe 32, anyway, early 30s. But so then we had our first child when I was 36. And then I kind of thought that might be our only child. And we were trying for a while. And, you know, of course, when you get later, it gets harder. But actually then now I'm 47 and had a baby 6 months ago, which is unusual. Let me just say, don't plan on that, but it all worked out. So I am dealing with all the family planning issues, but to me, what my experience has shown me is that, and I've seen this from many of my friends, is that it's really hard to plan exactly when you're going to have kids. And it's actually hard to plan a lot of things about your career, but that's something where sometimes you may get pregnant and you didn't mean to, and other times you may be trying for years. And so just, I think, to sort of recognize that the error bars on your plan for starting a family are significant. And so to try to make decisions that would be in place, whatever, you know, whether things happen faster or slower than your ideal situation. You know, I would say that moving through, like on the academic path, most universities at this point have ways to delay the tenure clock that apply both to men and women. Different countries have very radically different maternity leave policies. I have a family in Germany, and they have 12 months paid family leave that can be split between the parents. So, you know, I think that it is a challenge for sure at any stage in your career to be balancing kids and family. But I guess in my own experience is that, you know, making the decisions that you can control, I like to make those decisions. And then for the ones that are out of my control, try to work those in later. Because sometimes, you know, if you say, well, I'm not going to take this job because I want to have kids, and then if things don't work out, that you're not able to have the kids at that timeline, then suddenly it can feel like a lot of things are hard to pin down. And so most, you know, I've worked with a lot of students who've gone on the job market while they were pregnant, or, you know, you don't need to tell people that you're pregnant. If you're pregnant, you don't, you know, this is all your own business. And so just treating your career decision-making and your family decision-making as intertwined in your own head, but it doesn't mean you have to you know, it's your decisions to be made, I guess, just to empower you to do what's best for you. On the question about the two-body problem, I've certainly experienced that many times on the employer side, having been involved in faculty hires. And, you know, the decisions that any couple is making are usually unique to their situation. It usually works out best if, you know, both people are actively on the job market, because you really never know who's going to get the offer. I've known many, many couples where the couples themselves were quite sure that, you know, person A would be the more employable one, but actually person B might get the more desirable offer. And so you really don't know whether you or your partner is going to be the one who's going to be hired first. So I think both people going on an active job search and assuming that if either of you gets a job, then you can start working it out. I think waiting until you get verbal affirmation that you're moving along in the hiring process is usually recommended, so that you know, you're being judged just for you. And nobody in the United States, it's illegal for employers to ask about your family situation. So just to know that you don't have to share that. But at some point before it gets too far along, you do want to let the people who are coordinating know, because a lot of universities can organize a spousal hire situation, or they can help network, or there may be, if they, once they decide who they want to hire, then they can help you try to get your partner hired. So every story is different, but I think, talking to people and getting advice specific to the organization you're applying to, and again, this is a good, back to the networking for advice. This is where advice can really help you, because if you talk to 10 different people, you'll have 10 different stories, and all of that can help you figure out what's best for your situation.
Yeah, thanks for that advice. And it's certainly always valuable to have many different perspectives.
Thanks.
So at this point, we have about 2 minutes left in our time, and I want to be cognizant of your time and everyone else's. So I think I have one question that I could ask, but I think I'll leave the floor to you. If you have any kind of parting thoughts that you have, anything that you want to pass along, and I'll just hand it over to you.
Yeah, I guess I would just say, I think that the more you talk to people about your career and what you're hoping to get out of, your next transition or your next move, to me, that there's so much, there's the things that you don't know, but there's also things you don't know, for example. And I think the more you talk to people about where you're hoping your career goes, and asking them about theirs and how they made those decisions, that's a great way to just to build your knowledge of what opportunities are out there. And no one person has the full story, and you should be dubious about somebody who says, oh, definitely don't do that, or you'd never, anybody who seems too set in the right and wrong way to move forward with a career, because things are different now than they were 10 or 20 years ago, especially for interdisciplinary scholars. And I think they're very different for people in different countries. They're different for people who want to work in a big city versus a small town. And so just listen to your own heart, trust your own gut, get as much information as you can. And, I think that it's daunting to be navigating your career, but there's so much opportunity out there. And I really wish you all the best of luck, and feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all of your insights today. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone else does as well. And also thank you to everyone who signed in today and attended this talk. Hopefully we'll see you as this series continues. And
Thank you.
with that,
Bye.
we will sign off. Thank
Right.